Every corner of the ancient world tells the same story. A flood so massive, it wiped out nearly everything. From India to Mesoamerica, from the Bible to Babylon. They all speak of a world drowned in water. But what if it wasn't just a myth? What if the flood really happened? This is the tale of the waters that may have washed away entire civilizations. I'll tell you what happened across cultures, continents, and centuries. One story keeps surfacing with remarkable persistence. The story of a great flood that nearly destroyed all life on Earth. The universality of this narrative is perhaps one of the most compelling mysteries in comparative mythology and anthropology. When we examine these stories closely, we find not just superficial similarities, but deep structural parallels that suggest something far more significant than mere coincidence. In ancient Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh tells of Utnapishtim, a righteous man warned by the god Ea to build a massive vessel and save life from an impending. The gods, disturbed by the noise and chaos of humanity, had decided to cleanse the world with water. Utnapishtim follows divine instructions precisely, constructing a boat of specific dimensions, gathering animals and his family, and weathering a storm so fierce that even the gods themselves were terrified by what they had unleashed. When the waters finally recede, Utnapishtim sends out birds to test for dry land, and his vessel comes to rest on a mountain peak. The biblical account of Noah follows this same essential pattern with striking fidelity. God, grieved by human wickedness, chooses Noah to build an ark according to precise specifications. Noah gathers his family and pairs of every animal species, then endures a flood that covers the highest mountains. Like Utnapishtim, Noah sends out birds to search for dry land, and his ark eventually comes to rest on Mount Ararat. The parallels are so exact that scholars have long debated whether one story influenced the other, or whether both derive from an even older source. In Hindu tradition, the Matsya Purana tells of Manu, the first man, who is warned of a coming flood by Vishnu in the form of a great fish. Manu builds a boat and is pulled to safety by this divine fish, becoming the sole survivor of humanity and the progenitor of the new world. The Shatapatha Brahmana provides additional details, describing how Manu performs a sacrifice that produces a woman, and together they repopulate the earth. Chinese mythology speaks of Gun, the great flood that lasted for generations until the hero the Great finally controlled the waters through engineering and divine assistance. The flood was so extensive that it covered mountains and threatened to destroy all civilization. Yu's father Gun had attempted to stop the flood by building dikes and barriers, but only Yu succeeded by dredging channels and directing the water's flow. Greek mythology tells of Deucalion and Pyrrha, who survived a flood sent by Zeus to destroy the corrupt Bronze Age of humanity. Warned by Prometheus, Deucalion built a chest that carried him and his wife to safety on Mount Parnassus. When the waters receded, they repopulated the earth by throwing stones over their shoulders, which transformed into new human beings. In Mesoamerica, the Aztec creation myth describes multiple worlds destroyed by floods, with the fourth sun ending when the goddess Calcutlic caused a great deluge that transformed humans into fish. The Maya Popol Vuh tells of wooden people destroyed by a flood because they failed to honor their creators properly. The Inca spoke of Yuenu Pachacuti, a great flood that destroyed the first world, leaving only a few survivors on mountain peaks. Aboriginal Australian cultures across the continent preserve flood stories with remarkable consistency. The Bundjalung people tell of Enguthungli, the rainbow serpent who caused a great flood. The Gunwingu speak of the Wawaleg sisters and the Python Yolunga, whose actions brought devastating floods. These stories often include specific geographical references to actual locations that show evidence of ancient flooding. Even in North America, Flood narratives appear among diverse indigenous peoples. The Ojibwe tell of Nanabozo and the great flood that covered the earth, with various animals diving deep to retrieve mud from which the new world was formed. The Hopi speak of the destruction of the third world by flood, with the faithful saved by traveling in hollow reeds to the fourth world. Could so many people, separated by vast distances and thousands of years, all be imagining the same catastrophic event? The statistical improbability of such convergent storytelling suggests that these narratives may preserve the memory of actual events, passed down through oral tradition with remarkable fidelity. The specific details that appear across cultures, such as the sending of birds to find land, the resting of the vessel on a mountain, and the divine warning given to a righteous individual, point to either a common source or a shared experience so traumatic that it became permanently etched in human collective memory. The oldest written version of the Great Flood story does not appear in the Bible, as many assume, but emerges from the ancient civilizations of Sumer and Akkad, carved in cuneiform script on clay tablets that are over 4,000 years old. This discovery has revolutionized our understanding of how flood narratives developed and spread throughout the ancient world, suggesting that the biblical account may be one branch of a much older tree of tradition. The Epic of Gilgamesh, in its various versions, provides the most detailed and ancient account of the flood story. In this epic, the gods become disturbed by the noise and chaos of human civilization. Enlil, the god of wind and storm, convinces the other deities that humanity must be destroyed. However, Ea, the god of wisdom and water, takes pity on humanity and warns Utnapishtim of the coming disaster. The instructions Ea provides are remarkably specific. Build a boat with equal dimensions in all directions, cover it with pitch, inside and out. Bring aboard your family and craftsmen, and gather the seed of all living creatures. The flood itself is described with terrifying vividness. For 6 days and 7 nights, the storm rages with such intensity that even the gods flee to the highest heaven in fear. The darkness is so complete that people cannot see each other, and the water rises until it covers the mountains. On the 7th day, the storm subsides, and Utnapishtim opens a window to see a world transformed into a vast sea of silence. His boat has come to rest on Mount Naimash, and he waits 7 more days before sending out a dove, then a swallow, and finally a raven to search for dry land. The parallels with the biblical account are so precise that they cannot be coincidental. Both stories feature a righteous man chosen by a deity, specific instructions for building a vessel, the gathering of animals and family members, a flood that covers the mountains, the sending of birds to find land, and the eventual resting of the boat on a mountain peak. Even the duration of the flood shows similarities, with both accounts emphasizing the number 7 in their chronology. The Sumerian king list provides additional context for understanding how ancient Mesopotamians viewed the flood. This remarkable document, compiled around 2100 BCE, but drawing on much older sources, lists the kings who ruled before and after the flood. The antediluvian kings are said to have reigned for impossibly long periods, sometimes tens of thousands of years, while the post-flood kings have more realistic lifespans. The list states simply, "Then the flood swept over." After the flood had swept over, and the kingship had descended from heaven, the kingship was in Kish. Archaeological evidence from Mesopotamia has revealed multiple layers of flood deposits at various ancient sites, including Uruk and Shu. These deposits, dating 2 different periods, suggest that the region experienced repeated catastrophic flooding throughout its early history. The city of Shorapak is particularly significant because it is mentioned in the flood story as Utnapishtim's home city. and archaeological excavations there have revealed a substantial flood layer dating to around 2900 BC. The Atrahasis epic, another Mesopotamian flood narrative that predates the biblical account, provides additional details about the divine motivation for the flood. In this version, humanity has become so numerous and noisy that the gods cannot sleep. After attempting to reduce the human population through plague and famine, they finally resort to the ultimate solution of a universal flood. This narrative framework suggests that the flood story served not only as a historical memory, but also as a theological explanation for the relationship between gods and humans. The influence of these Mesopotamian flood narratives extended far beyond their region of origin. As trade networks and cultural exchange expanded throughout the ancient Near East, these stories traveled with merchants, diplomats, and migrants. The biblical account, while sharing the essential structure of the Mesopotamian versions, adapts the narrative to fit monotheistic theology and Hebrew cultural values. This process of cultural transmission and adaptation helps explain how flood stories spread throughout the ancient world while maintaining their core elements. Recent discoveries of even older flood narratives, such as fragments found at Ugarit and other ancient sites, suggest that the tradition may be even more ancient than previously thought. These findings indicate that flood stories were already well established in oral tradition long before they were committed to writing, raising the possibility that they preserve memories of actual events that occurred in prehistoric times. Modern science has provided compelling evidence that catastrophic flooding events have indeed occurred throughout human history, lending credibility to the possibility that flood narratives preserve memories of real disasters. Geologists, climatologists, and archaeologists have identified multiple mechanisms by which massive floods could have devastated ancient civilizations, creating the kind of traumatic memories that might persist in oral tradition for millennia. The end of the last ice age, approximately 11,700 years ago, marked one of the most dramatic periods of environmental change in human history. As massive ice sheets that had covered much of North America and Europe began to melt, enormous volumes of water were released into the world's oceans and river systems. This process was not gradual and steady, but occurred in sudden, catastrophic pulses that could have caused devastating floods across vast regions. One of the most significant of these events was the draining of glacial Lake Missoula, in what is now Montana. This enormous lake, held back by an ice dam, contained more water than Lake Erie and Lake Ontario combined. When the ice dam failed, the entire lake emptied in a matter of days, creating floods of unimaginable magnitude that carved the channeled scablands of eastern Washington and sent a wall of water down the Columbia River to the Pacific Ocean. The discharge rate was 10 times greater than all the world's current rivers combined, and the floodwaters reached heights of 400 feet above the current river level. Similar outburst floods occurred across the globe as ice dams failed and glacial lakes emptied. In Siberia, the draining of glacial lakes created floods that carved enormous valleys and deposited massive amounts of sediment across the landscape. In Europe, the collapse of ice dams released floods that reshaped river valleys and coastal plains. These events would have been witnessed by early human populations and could have provided the basis for flood narratives that were passed down through generations. The Black Sea deluges hypothesis, proposed by marine geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman, suggests that one of the most significant flood events in human history occurred around 5600 BC, when rising Mediterranean waters breached the natural dam at the Bosphorus Strait. According to this theory, the Black Sea was originally a much smaller freshwater lake surrounded by fertile plains, where early agricultural communities had established themselves. When the Mediterranean broke through, salt water poured into the basin at a rate 200 times greater than Niagara Falls. raising the water level by several feet per day and forcing the rapid evacuation of coastal settlements. The archaeological evidence supporting this hypothesis includes the discovery of ancient shorelines, now submerged beneath the Black Sea, as well as freshwater mollusk shells that were suddenly replaced by saltwater species around 5600 BC. Core samples from the Black Sea floor show a distinct layer marking the transition from freshwater to saltwater conditions. If this event occurred as theorized, it would have displaced hundreds of thousands of people and could have provided the historical basis for flood narratives spread throughout the ancient Near East and beyond. In the Indian subcontinent, geological evidence points to massive flooding events associated with the drying up of the river system around 2000 BC. This river, mentioned frequently in ancient Vedic texts, was once a major waterway that supported numerous Indus Valley civilization settlements. Climate change and tectonic activity caused the river to change course and eventually disappear, but not before creating devastating floods that may have contributed to the decline of the Indus Valley civilization. The memory of these floods could have been preserved in Hindu flood narratives. Recent research has also identified evidence of massive flooding events in other regions mentioned in flood narratives. In China, geological studies have revealed evidence of enormous floods along the Yellow River around 1900 BC, which coincides with the legendary flood of Gunyu described in Chinese mythology. These floods were caused by the failure of natural dams created by landslides, and may have been the historical basis for Chinese flood stories. Tsunami events, while different from river flooding, could also have contributed to flood narratives. The Mediterranean region has experienced numerous devastating tsunamis throughout history, including events that could have inspired stories of sudden, overwhelming floods. The eruption of Thera around 1600 BC created tsunamis that devastated coastal communities throughout the eastern Mediterranean and may have contributed to flood narratives in the region. Climate research has revealed that the period between 3000 and 2000 BCE was marked by significant climate instability, with periods of extreme precipitation followed by severe drought. This climatic volatility would have created conditions conducive to both flooding and the social upheaval that often accompanies such disasters. The combination of environmental stress and social disruption could have made flood events particularly memorable and worthy of preservation in oral tradition. The scientific evidence suggests that while a single global flood that covered the entire Earth is not supported by geological data, multiple regional flooding events of catastrophic proportions did occur during the period when human civilizations were developing. These events would have been traumatic enough to create lasting memories that could have been preserved and transmitted through oral tradition, eventually becoming the flood narratives we find in cultures around the world. Atlantis and Lost Worlds. The story of Atlantis, first recorded by the Greek philosopher Plato in his dialogues, Timaeus and Cratios, around 360 BCE, has captivated human imagination for over 10 millennia. While many scholars consider Atlantis to be a philosophical allegory rather than a historical account, the possibility that it was inspired by real sunken civilizations has gained credibility as underwater archaeology has revealed numerous submerged settlements around the world. These discoveries suggest that the rise in sea levels following the last ice age may have indeed swallowed entire cities and civilizations, providing a factual basis for stories of lost worlds beneath the waves. Plato described Atlantis as an advanced maritime civilization that existed 9,000 years before his time, making it contemporary with the end of the last ice age. According to his account, Atlantis was a powerful island nation, located beyond the Pillars of Hercules that had conquered much of the Mediterranean world before being defeated by ancient Athens. The Atlanteans had developed sophisticated technology, built magnificent cities with concentric rings of canals, and possessed knowledge of metallurgy and engineering that surpassed their contemporaries. However, their civilization became corrupt and aggressive, leading the gods to destroy it in a single day and night of earthquakes and floods, causing the entire island to sink beneath the sea. While the specific details of Plato's account may be fictional, the concept of advanced civilizations being destroyed by rising seas has found support in archaeological discoveries around the world. The end of the last ice age saw global sea levels rise by approximately 400 feet, a process that occurred over several millennia, but included periods of rapid change that could have overwhelmed coastal settlements within human memory. Off the coast of Gujarat, India, marine archaeologists have discovered the submerged remains of Dwarka, a city mentioned in Hindu scriptures as the kingdom of Lord Krishna. The underwater excavations have revealed well-planned streets, massive stone walls, and sophisticated drainage systems that suggest a highly organized urban civilization. Radiocarbon dating of artifacts from the site indicates that the city was submerged around 1500 BC, possibly due to a combination of sea level rise and seismic activity. The discovery of Dwarka has lent credibility to ancient Indian texts that describe advanced civilizations existing in areas now covered by the sea. Near the Japanese island of Yonaguni, divers have discovered what appears to be a massive stone structure with terraced levels, straight edges, and right angles that suggest artificial construction. The Yonaguni Monument, as it has come to be known, lies 75 feet beneath the surface and covers an area of approximately 150 by 40 meters. While debate continues over whether the structure is entirely natural or partially artificial, its geometric features and the presence of what appear to be carved symbols have led some researchers to suggest it may be the remains of a prehistoric civilization that was submerged when sea levels rose at the end of the Ice Age. In the Mediterranean, the discovery of Pevlapitri off the coast of southern Greece has provided concrete evidence of Bronze Age settlements that were submerged by rising seas. This underwater city, dated into around 2800 BCE, contains well-preserved streets, buildings, and courtyards that offer a glimpse into life in a coastal settlement that was gradually overwhelmed by the sea. The site demonstrates that sophisticated urban planning existed in the region much earlier than previously thought, and that rising sea levels did indeed claim entire communities. More controversial are the underwater structures reported off the coast of Cuba, where sonar imaging has revealed what appear to be large stone structures at depths of over 2,000 feet. While these formations have not been thoroughly investigated due to their extreme depth, some researchers have suggested they could be the remains of settlements that were submerged during the rapid sea level changes at the end of the Ice Age. The depth of these structures would require them to be much older than conventional archaeology suggests for advanced civilizations in the Americas. The concept of lost civilizations beneath the sea gains additional support from the discovery of submerged forests and river valleys around the world. Off the coast of Britain, divers have found the remains of Doggerland, a vast landmass that once connected Britain to continental Europe. This area, now beneath the North Sea, was home to Mesolithic peoples who would have been forced to migrate as rising seas gradually claimed their territory. Similar submerged landscapes have been found off the coasts of Australia, North America, and other continents, all testifying to the dramatic changes in geography that occurred as the Ice Age ended. The psychological impact of losing entire homelands to the sea would have been profound for ancient peoples. Unlike gradual environmental changes that occur over many generations, the submersion of coastal settlements would have been visible within individual lifetimes, creating traumatic memories that would naturally be preserved in oral tradition. The transformation of familiar landscapes into underwater realms would have seemed supernatural to ancient peoples, leading to stories of divine punishment and lost golden ages. Recent advances in underwater archaeology and marine geology have made it possible to explore these submerged landscapes in unprecedented detail. Side-scans, sonar, remotely operated vehicles, and other technologies have revealed that the continental shelves around the world contain numerous archaeological sites that were once above sea level. As these investigations continue, they are likely to uncover more evidence of prehistoric settlements that were claimed by rising seas, providing a factual foundation for the many cultural memories of lost worlds beneath the waves. The possibility that Atlantis and similar stories preserve memories of real submerged civilizations does not require accepting all the fantastical details found in ancient accounts. Rather, it suggests that the core concept of advanced societies being destroyed by floods and sea level rise may be based on historical events that were later embellished with mythological elements as they were passed down through oral tradition. In this interpretation, stories like Atlantis serve as both historical memory and cautionary tale, reminding us of the power of natural forces to reshape human civilization. The persistence of flood narratives across cultures and millennia raises profound questions about how traumatic memories can be preserved and transmitted through human societies. Recent research in neuroscience, psychology, and anthropology has begun to illuminate the mechanisms by which collective memories of catastrophic events can survive for thousands of years, suggesting that flood stories may indeed preserve authentic historical information passed down through countless generations of oral tradition. The human brain appears to be specifically adapted for remembering and transmitting stories, particularly those involving survival-relevant information. Neuroscientists have discovered that narratives activate multiple regions of the brain simultaneously, creating rich, multisensory memories that are more resistant to forgetting than abstract information. Stories that involve danger, survival, and strong emotional content are especially likely to be remembered and retold, which explains why flood narrative, with their themes of catastrophic destruction and miraculous survival, would have been particularly memorable to ancient peoples. The concept of cultural memory, developed by scholars like Maurice Helbwachs and Jan As, provides a framework for understanding how societies preserve and transmit memories of significant events across generations. Cultural memory operates through various mechanisms, including ritual practices, storytelling traditions, and physical monuments, all of which serve to keep important memories alive within a community. Flood narratives often incorporate all these elements, being told as sacred stories, commemorated in religious rituals, and sometimes associated with specific geographical landmarks. Research into oral tradition has revealed that certain types of information can be transmitted with remarkable accuracy across many generations. Studies of Aboriginal Australian cultures have shown that some oral traditions preserve accurate information about geographical and environmental conditions that existed thousands of years ago. For example, Aboriginal stories about the formation of certain landscape features have been confirmed by geological research, and some traditions appear to preserve memories of sea level changes that occurred over 10,000 years ago. The accuracy of oral transmission depends on several factors, including the cultural importance of the information, the presence of mnemonic devices and structured narrative patterns, and the existence of social institutions dedicated to preserving traditional knowledge. Flood narratives often possess all these characteristics. They are considered sacred or historically significant. They follow recognizable narrative patterns that aid memory, and they are often maintained by religious or cultural specialists who are responsible for preserving traditional knowledge. Psychological research has identified specific features that make stories more likely to be remembered and transmitted accurately. These include the presence of counterintuitive elements that capture attention, strong emotional content that creates lasting impressions, and social relevance that makes the story worth sharing. Flood narratives typically contain all these elements. The counterintuitive idea of the entire world being covered with water, the strong emotions associated with survival and loss, and the social relevance of understanding humanity's relationship with divine forces and natural disasters, the phenomenon of cryptomnesia, where forgotten memories resurfaced and are experienced as new insights, may also play a role in the persistence of flood narratives. Ancient peoples who experienced or heard about catastrophic floods might have incorporated these memories into their cultural narratives in ways that were not consciously recognized as historical preservation. Over time, these embedded memories could have influenced the development of flood stories, even when the original events were no longer consciously remembered. Recent research in epigenetics has raised the intriguing possibility that traumatic experiences can leave molecular marks that are passed down through generations. While this research is still in its early stages and primarily focuses on individual trauma rather than cultural memory, it suggests that the effects of catastrophic events might persist in ways that we are only beginning to understand. The idea that flood experiences could leave lasting traces in human populations, whether through genetic, cultural, or psychological mechanisms, provides another potential explanation for the universality of flood narratives. The role of geographical memory in preserving flood stories should not be underestimated. Many flood narratives are associated with specific locations that show evidence of ancient flooding, suggesting that the landscape itself serves as a mnemonic device for preserving historical memories. When people live in areas that have experienced catastrophic flooding, the physical evidence of these events, such as unusual geological formations, flood deposits, or changes in river courses, can serve as constant reminders that help keep the associated stories alive. The social function of flood narratives also contributes to their persistence. These stories often serve multiple purposes within a culture. They provide explanations for natural phenomena, establish moral and religious frameworks, create social cohesion through shared narratives, and offer practical wisdom about dealing with natural disasters. Because flood stories serve so many important functions, communities have strong incentives to preserve and transmit them accurately. The convergent evolution of flood narratives across different cultures may also reflect universal human responses to catastrophic flooding. When communities experience devastating floods, they naturally develop explanatory narratives that help them make sense of the disaster and cope with its aftermath. The similarity of these narratives across cultures may reflect common psychological and social responses to flood disasters rather than historical connections between different flood stories. Modern research into collective memory and cultural transmission suggests that flood narratives represent one of humanity's most successful examples of long-term information preservation. Whether they preserve memories of specific historical events or represent archetypal responses to flood disasters, these stories demonstrate the remarkable capacity of human cultures to maintain important information across vast spans of time. In an age when we are increasingly concerned about preserving digital information for future generations, the persistence of flood narratives offers valuable insights into the mechanisms by which crucial knowledge can survive for millennia. The question of whether the Great Flood really happened cannot be answered with a simple yes or no. The evidence suggests a more nuanced reality. While a single global deluge that covered the entire Earth finds no support in geological science, multiple catastrophic flooding events throughout human history could easily have provided the experiential foundation for the flood narratives that appear across cultures worldwide. The universality and persistence of these stories point to something far more significant than mere coincidence or independent invention. The scientific evidence for massive flooding events during the period of human civilization is overwhelming. From the catastrophic draining of glacial lakes at the end of the Ice Age, to the possible breaching of the Bosphorus that created the Black Sea, from the devastating floods along China's Yellow River to the tsunamis that periodically swept Mediterranean, our ancestors lived through water-related disasters of almost unimaginable magnitude. These events would have displaced entire populations, destroyed established communities, and created the kind of collective trauma that naturally becomes embedded in cultural memory. What makes flood narratives particularly compelling is not just their widespread distribution, but their remarkable consistency in detail. The specific elements that appear across cultures, such as divine warnings, the construction of vessels, the gathering of animals, the sending of birds to find land, and the eventual resting on mountain peaks, suggest either a common historical source or shared human responses to flood disasters that are so fundamental they appear universal. The precision of these parallels argues against independent invention and points toward either cultural transmission or authentic historical memory. The role of oral tradition in preserving these memories cannot be overstated. Research into how human societies maintain and transmit important information across generations has revealed that certain types of narratives, particularly those involving survival-relevant information and strong emotional content, can be preserved with remarkable accuracy for thousands of years. Flood stories, with their themes of catastrophic destruction and miraculous survival, represent exactly the kind of information that oral cultures would prioritize for preservation. The discovery of submerged settlements and archaeological sites around the world has added a new dimension to our understanding of how rising sea levels affected ancient civilizations. The ruins of Dwarka off the Indian coast, the submerged city of Pavlopetre in Greece, and the mysterious structures near Yanaguni, Japan, all testify to the reality that advanced settlements were indeed claimed by rising waters. While these discoveries do not prove the existence of a single global flood, they demonstrate that the submersion of human communities by water was a recurring theme in ancient history. The psychological and neurological research into how traumatic memories are preserved and transmitted provides additional support for the authenticity of flood narratives. The human brain appears specifically adapted for remembering and sharing stories that contain survival-relevant information, and the mechanisms of cultural memory ensure that the most important stories are preserved across generations. The fact that flood narratives have survived for millennia suggests they contain information that ancient peoples considered essential for their descendants to know. Perhaps most significantly, flood narratives serve as a bridge between scientific understanding and human meaning. While geology can tell us about the physical processes that caused ancient floods, and archaeology can reveal their impact on human settlements, it is through flood stories that we glimpse the human experience of these catastrophic events. These narratives preserve not just the fact that floods occurred, but the emotional and spiritual responses of the people who lived through them. The enduring power of flood narratives also lies in their continued relevance to contemporary human experience. In an age of climate change and rising sea levels, the ancient stories of civilizations overwhelmed by water carry new urgency and meaning. They remind us that human societies, no matter how advanced or confident, remain vulnerable to the forces of nature. The flood stories serve as both historical memory and prophetic warning, connecting us to our ancestors' experiences while alerting us to dangers we may face in the future. The Great Flood, whether understood as myth or memory, ultimately represents something profound about the human condition. Our vulnerability to natural forces, our capacity for survival and renewal, and our need to find meaning in catastrophic events. The stories preserve not just information about past disasters, but wisdom about how to respond to them, how to prepare for them, and how to rebuild after they occur. In this sense, flood narratives are among humanity's most valuable cultural treasures, containing lessons that remain relevant thousands of years after they were first told. The question of whether the flood really happened may be less important than what these stories tell us about ourselves and our relationship with the natural world. They remind us that we are part of a larger story that extends far back into prehistory and will continue long into the future. They connect us to our ancestors, who faced unimaginable challenges and found ways to survive and preserve their knowledge for future generations. And they challenge us to consider what stories we are creating today that will help our descendants understand and navigate the challenges they will face. In the end, the great flood narratives represent one of humanity's most successful attempts to preserve crucial information across vast spans of time. Whether they preserve memories of specific historical events or archetypal responses to natural disasters, they demonstrate the remarkable capacity of human cultures to maintain essential knowledge through the power of story. As we face our own environmental challenges and work to preserve information for future generations, we would do well to study and appreciate the mechanisms by which our ancestors ensured that their most important stories would survive to reach us across the millennia. From water comes life, and sometimes rebirth. If this tale of ancient survival moved you, help it survive a little longer. Like, comment, and subscribe for more stories the world forgot. Until now, because I'll tell you what happened, is just getting started.